So this is an opportunity for us to connect the cultural and curricular wars to the Heritage Foundation as the home and the site of Project 2025. So what folks might not know is that the Heritage Foundation cut its teeth on precisely the kind of curricular wars that we've been seeing unfold over the last couple years. They were involved in it in the 1970s. So Nancy, tell us a little bit about this formative history, particularly what it reveals to us about the kind of organization Heritage is, what it's up to, and how successful it's been.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And it is a fascinating story. The Heritage Foundation today is the 800-pound gorilla on the right. It has an annual budget of over $100 million, has a huge multi-story office in Washington, D.C. It is one of the main agenda-setting organizations on the right, if not the dominant one. So it's not surprising that it took the lead in creating Project 2025. But what people need to know is that unlike some of the other groups on the right, Heritage from the very beginning blended the toxic cocktail that today's right is gulping in large doses, a combination of plutocratic economics, Christian nationalism, and the weaponization of racism, gender anxiety, and parental fears about sex to achieve its goals. So back in 1974, 50 years ago, Heritage had a staff of 5 people and a rented office above a garage. It had just started up the year before. But 1974, in the spring of 1974, is when its founder, Paul Weyrich, sniffed a big opportunity in West Virginia in a textbook fight that was brewing in Kanawha County, home of the state capital of Charleston. As he said later, and I quote, "The alliance between religion and politics didn't just happen. It sure didn't. Weyrich's tiny team inserted itself in a fight begun by Alice Moore, the wife of a fundamentalist minister and a school board member who didn't like the new multicultural textbooks the district was adopting that year. So first, she complained about books that had any language other than what she called proper English. Then it was that the books were, in her words, filthy, disgusting trash, dirty books. Then it was that Malcolm X's autobiography disrespected Christianity. All the while, she was in the orbit of the John Birch Society. And some protesters just came right out and called the new books N-word books. Before it was over, parents of about 1/5 of the students in the county kept them home from the schools. Someone was shot for crossing the picket line. Moore's allies physically attacked supporters of the new curriculum at a school board meeting, and bombs were planted in 2 elementary schools and the school board building. As Maya Angelou wrote, "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." Because what the Heritage Foundation showed us then in its infancy is that it would bring gasoline to any fight that would help build a following of reactionary voters and activists, which at that time did not exist in anything like the numbers we see today. And not only that, but Heritage would not blink at violence if it seemed to help the cause. It actually provided legal counsel to the bomber, Marvin Horan was his name, who was convicted and spent 3 years in prison. But was Heritage ashamed of that? No. Along with the anti-busing fight then happening in Boston among Irish Catholics, Heritage saw it as a growth opportunity to build a movement for what they called parental rights. As the bomber's lawyer said afterwards, and I quote, "We learned that if you pick the right fight at the right time, it can be profitable."
They got that right. Right. And we were just thinking too about another way in which they were able to grow the movement, of course, which was linking it to abortion. A lot of people don't know that initially evangelicals weren't pro-life. They weren't excited, about this issue. And Weyrich, again, saw that opportunity to weaponize, the resistance to integration, the resistance to the civil rights movement, and to marry it to this idea about about abortion, and it's become, again, the juggernaut that it is. So knowing these histories help us see that these issues have always been connected. And, what's effective about the curricular wars has been their erasure of those connections. So a lot of what we're doing here and together is bringing those connections back so that we can, read it all for what it is. So let me ask you then. So I guess this is like getting into the head of Wyrick and the Heritage Foundation to paint a picture of the version of American society that it wants, that it envisions, that it's trying to push us, and sees this as the opportunity to make significant advance forward. So what is the America that they're trying to create?
USA, it's not one you'd want to live in, any of us. And it's not one in which our children could thrive. And it's not one, frankly, in which our planet can continue. And I think this question of why Heritage and its donors and allies see Project 2025 as necessary right now is incredibly important. And it's really telling of how far right and, in fact, truly authoritarian the project is. So in the half century since Heritage went to battle over multicultural textbooks in West Virginia, it has helped train and equip an ever larger and more radical political right, including capturing one of our two major political parties and turning it against the factual universe, against the Constitution, and against basic measures to promote an inclusive, fair, and sustainable society. Heritage plans like Project 2025, we should know, had a major influence on the presidencies of George W. Bush and of Donald Trump. But all that power has not sated this radical right. On the contrary, repeated historical experience, as I found in my book research, prove to them that the vast majority of Americans reject the kind of society desired by obscenely rich donors on the right and the operatives that they fund. And so elected officials who are accountable to voters again and again have backed up and stopped short of carrying out the full horrific donor agenda. And that is true from Ronald Reagan forward. He was a disappointment. George W. Bush was a disappointment. Trump's first administration was a disappointment. But rather than reconsider their unpopular agenda, as any democratic movement would with this kind of resistance, what they have done instead is conclude that they need to shackle democracy in the ways that we have seen roll out, especially since the 2010 midterms: mass voter suppression, ridiculous gerrymandering, destruction of unions, and on and on and on. But even that proved not to be enough. So the wrecking ball that Donald Trump was in the White House, even as bad as it was, that was not enough for the donors and the operatives, especially in the fossil fuel sector. And they were mad that they said he had a slow rollout, he didn't get enough done, blah, 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 blah. Why? Because the media, the courts, ordinary citizens, and particularly the federal civil service held in check many of Trump's worst impulses and desires. And that is why Heritage and its partners issued Project 2025 and put so much precision into the plans to ensure that if a Republican is elected in November, and of course they all want Donald Trump, checks and balances will be hard to find. There will be no obstruction of the right's plans to remodel America on the dictatorship of Viktor Orban in Hungary. Now, this is really important to understand, and people may not be familiar with Orban, so you can look him up, but it's really important to know why he has become such a model, why he gets invited to the Conservative Political Action Conference again and again, and so forth. Orban has used elections in Hungary to undermine democracy and to ensure perpetual power for himself and his backers. He has purged the civil service and he has refilled it with obedient loyalists, so he and his team get everything that they want. And this is what the Heritage Foundation now wants to see happen in the United States. On March 8th, last month, International Women's Day, for heaven's sakes. On International Women's Day, I don't think they knew it was, but still, Heritage's CEO, a man named Kevin Roberts, hosted Viktor Orban for a several-hour in-person meeting with allies at Heritage, and then called him, and I quote, not just a model for conservative statecraft, but the model. Let's be clear about who's model and how potent.
Why wasn't this all the rage? Why didn't this get the coverage that Claudine Gay got, for example?
I know. Like while that was going on, yeah, the media, they just, they're like lemmings. They just follow whatever story gets cooked up. I mean, there were a few outlets that picked it up. The New Republic had a very good story about this visit that people can look up. But for the most part, they didn't pay attention to that meeting at the Heritage Foundation. And that meeting at the Heritage Foundation tells us everything. Well, doesn't tell us everything, but it's like a thesis statement for what this plan is all about, right? This is about undermining democracy, using elections, using the formal mechanisms of democracy to make it so that the people cannot have effect going forward. It could not be more audacious, it could not be more radical, and it could not be more dangerous to everything that people on this call care about and that the people that we admire, going back for generations, worked so hard to achieve for us.
So Nancy, given the people that are on this call, let's drill down just to give some top lines about what parents and those who are invested in education need to know about Project 2025.
Basically, to understand what Project 2025 will mean for schools, for public education, for parents, and for kids, what you need to do is think about the most radical threats to public education that you've seen come out of states like Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Arizona. Then imagine what would happen if the federal government nationalized this wrecking ball agenda and inflicted it on every state in the union. That's the kind of tsunami that Project 2025 seeks to set in motion. There's so much to this plan, so many precise guidelines, but let me just give you a few key elements of the plan. This plan would make educational censorship the law of the land. All of America would be subject to the type of don't say race and don't say gays laws that were enacted in Florida, Georgia, Montana, and other Republican-dominated states. The plan would abolish the Department of Education. It would send federal tax dollars to fund Christian private schools. It would stop Head Start preschool for low-income children. And it would end requirements that federal funds support students from low-income families, switching to a so-called no strings attached system of block grants that the states would control. And it would further the strangulation of public schools by creating what they call a federal scholarship tax credit that basically wealthy families could use like private school vouchers to avoid paying the full taxes they owe while keeping their kids away from other kids. And you can also forget about accommodations for students with special needs. None of these unregulated schools would be accountable for providing for all students in an equitable way. And if that is not enough, chilling enough, it would prohibit, Project 2025 would prohibit the Centers for Disease Control from recommending the vaccination of school children or requiring any other public health.
Are you kidding? This is insane.
I know.
I mean,
is being driven by a combination of fossil fuel donors like Charles Koch, who are terrified that democracy is going to cut off their profit source, right? They don't want us to go to safe alternatives like wind and solar and other things that would cut into fossil, that would keep him from being one of the world's richest men, and donors like him. But the other thing too is they can never get where they want to go without partnering with Christian nationalists, right? Who left the factual universe a long time ago. who have never gotten over the fact that they don't control the country as they felt that they once did. So that's what we're seeing here. It is an absolutely toxic fusion of plutocratic ambition and opportunistic use of Christian nationalists who they keep disinformed and in a panic through the Fox network. I mean,
Oh, gosh.
yeah.
Well, Nancy, you lit the fire on us, under us, right? Again and again, no matter how many times I hear this, I'm still shocked. I have to put my eyebrows back down again, just to take another step. So just in the last 30 seconds or so that we have, one of the things that you had said in our activation a couple of weeks ago is that it's so horrible. There's something in Project 2025 that should activate every constituency. And so one of our challenges is to try to create the space for us to see the connections between the attacks on, traditionally marginalized groups and the attacks on democracy, to see that we can't save one without the other. So what is your parting word of wisdom for people on this phone to take with them about how this is all connected together?
Yeah, Kim, when I was writing Democracy in Chains, I had to defy my editors at some point and say, because I wanted to write into being the kind of coalition that we needed to see to fight this. And it has been kind of amazing to see people across all these, often siloed areas, environmental stuff, women's groups, civil rights, education, pro-democracy, et cetera. Well, I feel like now the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 is doing that on a massive scale. They are helping us call into being the coalition that can achieve what Bishop Barber calls the third reconstruction, right? That can enable us to finally break through so many of the obstacles that have kept us from renewing democracy, from achieving equity, from getting a sustainable economy, saving our environment, because they are taking aim at every single constituency you could imagine that is about sanity, sustainability, equity, justice, etc. So I think that this is one of those moments when we have to seize the opportunity that they have provided us and put them on the back foot, and we should hold every single Republican candidate accountable. Do you support this Project 2025? We should, be in the media. We should be doing everything that we can to help everyone understand how catastrophic this plan would be and why this election is existential. It is not between two men. It is about what kind of country we will be, and the two alternative routes could not be more distinct.